an opportunity for evil to come in. And that's by design. Right? Either we trust God or we don't trust God. And so as he's rebelled against God, this is taking place. If we were to look back at chapter 15, verse 23, we saw that to obey God is better than sacrifice. Right? And so he's rejected God. He's rejected what God wants him to do. And it's easy then to go to Romans chapter 1. And in Romans chapter 1, we read this in verse 21. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. They exchanged the things of God for things made by God. They rejected the truth of God for the lies. And God gave them over to the futile way that they thought. Wouldn't you say this would probably be the same thing for Saul? He rejected God. He rejected being obedient to God. He rejected the authority of God as king in his life. And he opened up the opportunity to be controlled by evil, to be tormented by evil. And so as a result, they wanted to play some soothing music for him. Back in the day, when I was in college, that soothing music usually represented speed metal. I was just telling somebody else, like back in the day, I can't believe like some of the stuff that I listened to, because I go back and listen to it now. It's like, wow, like I was into some heavy stuff. But Pantera, Anthrax, some of you know what I'm talking about. And somewhere in college, I got turned on to some Christian music that, I mean, it was still kind of heavy, but it had different lyrics. It had a different tone to it. I know some of you are into all day, every day, just play worship music. Come on, give me some K-Love, right? I'm not that. So I'm sorry if I don't meet your expectations as a pastor. But there are certain playlists that we turn to when we need to be soothed, right? When you're trying to calm down a little bit. And some of them just incite a rage inside of us. We should probably avoid those, right? But Saul, like he didn't have the ability just to go on, throw on an MP3, hook up Spotify, right? So he needed somebody to come in and play. And apparently David was pretty good on an instrument called a lyre, right? And so he would play these soothing sounds for the king, and it would ease the torment that was going on inside of him. Now I want you to see here the providence of God at work. So Samuel was told to go to the house of Jesse and to anoint the next king, who happens to be David. That same David happens to play an instrument that just so happens to be needed by the king, and so he's able to get into the palace. Right? He wins the favor of the king. He becomes his armor bearer. Good things are happening. Right? And we flip over to chapter 17, probably the most prominent of all the passages here in 1 Samuel, because David steps on the scene and he slays the giant Goliath. Right? But what we need to see is that the battle lines are drawn. The Philistines have come against the Israelites. They're on opposing sides. And every day the champion of the Philistines would come out and shout to them like, hey, bring out your best. Let's see what you got. He would trash talk them. I'm sure not everything is recorded here, and probably some of it we don't want it to be. Right? He was probably trash talking the Israelites, and he was trying to prod them into fighting. Some of you guys probably have one of those in your family. Like, they just always, like, they're trying to prod you, right? Be careful. And so Goliath would do this morning and night. 40 days he did this. You know who else, like the Israelites had, that was kind of a big guy? I mean, Goliath, we read about, he was 9 foot tall. That's huge. I did a sermon on this one time, and I wore drywall stilts. Yeah. It was up there a ways. It's kind of crazy to think about that. But the Israelites had this guy who happened to be head and shoulders above the rest. The king, Saul. But head and shoulders was kind of flaky. Let that set with you. So he wasn't anywhere to be found. He was hiding along with all the other Israelites. And so it just so happened, right, providence of God, it just so happened that David, the youngest, he wasn't in battle. His older 3 brothers were, right? But he would run back and forth. And he needed to go now deliver a meal to his brothers and to check on them because Dad wanted a report. And he gets there at just the time Goliath is coming out to taunt the Israelites. And David, out of all of them, is like, who is this guy I think he is? That he's coming against the people of God. This uncircumcised Philistine. Right? He knew that the battle wasn't just against the Philistines and the Israelites. Right? It was against Dagon, their God, and Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. The same one that whenever the Ark of the Covenant was captured and put into the temple that they had with Dagon, that he fell on his face. Not once, but twice. And then he was dismembered. Right? And that was just a statue, but God's providence, his power, wanted to be on display. And so David was like, all right, so who's going to step up? Like, are we just going to let this guy get away with this? Nobody else was willing to step up. And they talked a little bit about the reward, like you could get some money, you could marry the king's daughter, and your family would be relieved of a tax burden. And so it's going to be great. Just go out there and fight him. You'll probably die, but you can go out there and fight him. And if you win, then you'll be rich. Good stuff will happen. But David didn't really seem to subscribe to that model of thinking. He was just like, I've got God with me. I mean, he was ready to go throw down. And yet the people of Israel, the king of Israel, said, oh, but you're just a boy. You're just a boy. When he went out to fight against Goliath, Goliath had the same words, like, what is this? Like, you're coming at me with a boy? Seriously. This is what you're going to do. Right? Saul, I mean, the man of God that he was, he's like, here's my armor. Right? Some help that'll be. It's like 2 sizes too big. David's like, I don't need this, right? In protecting the sheep, I mean, I've fought lions and tigers and bears. Right. And I've won every time. God delivered me then, he'll deliver me now. Right? And so I'm going to go into fight against him. So he picks up 5 smooth stones, he grabs his sling, pegs him in the front of the head, he falls on his face, he lops off his head. Woo, God wins the victory, right? That's the story everybody loves. But what we're not seeing is that the story isn't about David as much as it's about God. You see, and when we hear that story, we go, yeah, I'm David. I got the power of God in me. And when I go fight, man, I'm taking down giants. No, you're not. You're the Israelites cowering in your tent. That's our role in the story. Where we should be is on the front line with David, but oftentimes where we are is hiding with Saul. Because we don't have the heart, and that we respond in fear rather than faith. Chances are, if there was an obstacle out there, you and I would begin to complain about how big the obstacle was. We would rationalize why we're not smart enough, strong enough, equipped enough, have a large army enough to take down that obstacle. We would not be like David going, I've won before, I'll win now. God isn't going to let this happen. That's the struggle we find ourselves in. Right? First we see that he was given the opportunity to sue Saul, but that was an enemy of Saul's own making. Here's another point that I think stands out to me from the passage. Is that a lot of times, you and I, we get angry and upset and complain and we bicker at other people for what they don't do right or how much they didn't help us. But oftentimes the problem isn't them, it's us. Oftentimes the problem's not them, it's us. Saul had the Spirit of God. Saul had the power of God. Saul had the blessing of God. And yet Saul didn't trust God. And when things didn't go the way that he wanted them to go, that was taken from him. And as a response, the evil entered his life. Guys, a lot of times our struggles are not against them. We face our own battles of insecurity, our own demons of failure. and fear. We know what we didn't do, and we feel guilty about it, and so it's everybody else's fault that we made the wrong choice. Does that sound like your life at all, ever? I know there's been a lot of times in my life I've been angry at other people who did nothing wrong. But I just was having a bad day, going through some stuff and not processing it right. So the problem really was Saul. Well, we get through chapter 17, Goliath goes down and the Israelites chase the Philistines, win the battle. David gets the praise, he comes back, and it says in chapter 18, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Jonathan was a great military leader in his own right. And when his dad was not fighting, Jonathan was out there picking fights. Like, they were kindred spirits in the way that they attacked the enemy. Well, Jonathan gave David his armor and his weapons, and David went out and he fought for the king, and he won amazing battles, and he got so many victories and accolades, and all of this for the king. And yet in response, what does he get? Well, praise of people, sure. I mean, if we read on to to verse 7, it says, Saul has struck down his thousands. David his tens of thousands. Right? The people are excited. Saul, not so much. He was jealous. He was envious. All these people, they're talking up David. He slayed his 10,000s, but me, only 10,000 or only 1,000? Like, what's up with this? And it says, the next day a harmful spirit of God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within the house while David was playing the lyre. Remember that when his spirit would rage, David would play, and the spirit would be soothed. And now David is playing. He's still leading an army, but he's playing for the king. And the king is raging even more. Because it's not just any music being played, it's David playing the music. And he can't take it. And so he chucks his spear at David. And David eludes it. And he chucks it at him again, and David eludes it. You would think, hey, this is probably not a good time to play. Maybe I'll switch the song, or I'm just going to get out of the palace because this guy is trying to hurt me. Which is kind of what he does. Jonathan is his best friend, and Jonathan, even though it's his dad that's on the other side, he sides with David. And he's trying to help him out. David is given an opportunity after this great defeat to marry one of the king's daughters. And he declines. He's like, who am I that I should do this? And so she's given to another man. And yet there's another daughter who's given to David. She has a heart for him. And so he takes her in, and she also sides with David. Right? She puts a dummy in the bed and shoots him out the window so he can run. Jonathan is playing the role of a spy. He's in the house trying to figure out, does dad really intend to kill David or not? And so he makes this pact with David. Hey, if I talk to my dad and he wants to kill you, I'm going to let you know so you can go. And if my dad doesn't, then I'll let you know so you can come back in where it's safe. And then he finds out that dad doesn't like too much that he's sided with David and chucks a spear at his head. I mean, because Saul's an awesome guy, right? And so he's warned and he runs. And this whole thing kind of keeps playing out in the coming chapters. Right? We see that Saul pursues and David flees and God delivers over and over. But there's two kind of prominent spots where this takes place. One of which David is hiding in a cave with his guys, and Saul comes in to relieve himself, to use the restroom. And David happens to be, out of all the caves in all the world, this is the one he walks into. And he cuts off the corner of his garment. I've heard some scholars say that this quite possibly could be a corner of the Jewish prayer shawl that would have had 5 knots that would have represented the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, the law. And that was life. And so when he cut it, he was holding up actually his life. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that David was close enough, he could have annihilated him. Right? He could have taken the king's life. He probably should have taken the king's life. Like if we were in that situation, this guy's hunting me. I've done nothing wrong. We would want to take his life. so that we could have relief, have freedom. But David honors the office of king, even when the king is not honoring his own office. Maybe we could learn a little something about that today. Right, that we still honor the king. We honor the ones that God has chosen and put in place. We pray for them and we encourage them. Right, and so he cuts the corner of his garment, and when Saul leaves and is a safe distance away, David comes out and he's like, hey, look at this. I could have taken your life. Saul's like, you're right, I'm wrong. He lets up for a little bit, but just like a toddler, right, he's right back at it. Right, and so we see another time where Saul's army comes after David, and they go to camp over the night, and David and a couple of his guys, they sneak into the camp, take Saul's spear, take his water jug, and they leave. Now, the guy that's with him, he's like, you should just take his life. Nobody else is going to stop you right now. This is a great time. He's like, no, can't do it. Right? I honor the king. I honor the king. He was patient. 17 years patient of waiting for his time. Right? He was anointed, but he was not yet enthroned. 17 years. And in that 17 years, it was not like, hey, I'm being trained up, equipped, encouraged, so that when I take this role on, I'm going to be able to knock it out of the park. No, it was like, hey, the guy ahead of me hates me. He wants to kill me. I need to run for my life. If you open up the book of Psalms, most of which written by David, right, you get to hear a little bit of his heart. Like, I'm running to the Lord, my rock, my refuge, my strength. Why? Because the king wants to kill me. Because I've got the enemies. They're already attacking me and coming against me. And now, inside my own house, my own country, I've got a death warrant on my head. But he's trusting in God time and again. And so we see this play out. And we see that David is just continually sparing Saul. Now in verse 27, or chapter 27 rather, I want you to note that Samuel dies. In addition to Samuel dying, David has sought refuge from some of the priests who give him a weapon, the sword of Goliath, and some food. Saul hears about that, and he does what any ruthless, jealous king would do. He just kills all the priests, 85 of them, I think it says. And after he does so, he also kills all the people in the town. Some great, awesome king he is, right? He can't go take on the Philistines, but if you're going to help David, not going to happen. David hides in the land or finds refuge in the land of the Philistines. And he also finds relief from Saul, right? Because after he took his water jug and his spear, Saul's like, all right, you're a better man than I am, right? I'm going to take my ball and go home. And now in this land, we see that the Philistines are forming an army to go after the Israelites, after Saul. The Spirit of God has left Saul. Saul is desperate. Saul is looking for anything he can get, but Samuel's already dead. He can't go to his trusted advisor, the one that he never listened to. He can't go to that source. And so what he does is he goes back to something that shouldn't even be in the land, because he cast out all the diviners, the mediums, the spiritualists from the land. And yet he turns to his officials and says, hey, find me this witch at Endor. He disguises himself, goes in, and what's he want? He wants to summon Samuel from the dead. Here's some crazy stuff, and I won't promise I understand it. I'm not even going to try. But I find it interesting that there's nothing about this passage that says evil doesn't exist. That you cannot consult the spirits of the dead. But I do find that you're not supposed to. Right? And that you're trusting in something else to accomplish your desires, to change, to alter the outcome, rather than trusting God. And this is why I shared with some of you through social media back in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Deuteronomy chapter 18, we see a little bit of this play out. Verse 10. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering. Yes, that was happening in the land. Anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. Right? The reason that you're going in is because the people there haven't been trusting God. They've been worshiping false gods. They've been trying to interact with the spirit world. They've been trusting these idols that they've made in their own image or in the image of God's creation. And they're being driven out. They're being punished because of their rebellion. So don't do that. Because what we're told as believers is not that this stuff is fake, or not that we can just meddle with it as entertainment, but that it's real and it's dangerous. And that we should avoid it, and that we should also trust God. They were trying to manipulate the outcome, right? Regardless of whether it's cards or tea leaves or astrology or whatever we make up, right? Those things are not the things that God has set us on path to pursue. You want to change the outcome of your life? I've got a great plan for you. Let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 15. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Well, let's read it again, verse 22. And Samuel said, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams." Right? If you want to alter the course of your life, if you want to change the trajectory of your family tree, seek God, trust God, obey God, actually do what He says, and things will happen. They will fall down before you, and you'll be amazed at the power of God and what it can do in your life. But this isn't seeking outside sources. Matter of fact, it goes on to say in verse 23, for rebellion, right, going against God, is as the sin of divination, right? It calls it out. It is a sin. It's not what God wants for us. And presumption is as iniquity and idolatry, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, and He has rejected you from being king. If you chase those things, if you don't obey, you've rejected God. And if you reject God, God will reject you. Guys, this isn't true just for Saul. This was said to Saul. But I already read to you Romans chapter 1. This is true of you and I. If we don't obey God, if we reject God, if we reject God's place in our life, then we exchange the truth of God for the lies of God. We exchange the living God for the images of man and animal and other things. And God will give us over to a depraved mind. And we will do what ought not be done. Saul did what ought not be done. Right? And he was pursuant to something, some source of hope. And you know what he found? He found a Samuel that it doesn't seem to be a make-believe thing. This is not a puppet master. This is not a wizard behind a curtain. He finds Samuel saying, hey, you're going to die. And your two boys too. In chapter 31, guess what happens? He dies. And his two boys too. Right? It happens. It happens that way. And we need to understand, right, that we have to trust God. All of this other stuff is out of bounds. So can you do both? Can you claim God and yet pursue these spiritual things, these divination? No. Right? There's one true God. He's a jealous God. He's a loving God. And He's already told you not to do that. And He's called it a sin. He's told you the punishment would happen if you chase that. Right? So no, the answer is no. If you go to Acts 8, Acts 19, you can find some stories a little bit about this spiritual attack and demonic possession. And so it's really easy to say, hey man, I'm a Christian. I identify, but it says it's not enough. It's just not enough. We have to trust God. And the way that we know that we trust God is we actually do what He says. I'm going to give you 3 key questions that I think help us to process this. And I can guarantee you they're not easy questions. The first one is this. Who do you treat poorly when you're hurting? Think of Saul and his attitudes and his actions. Who do you treat poorly when you're hurting? My guess is it's probably somebody really close to you. Everybody else maybe gets the sanctified version of you. Everything's all right. There's a few people, they get your wrath. Who is it in your life? Where do you turn when you don't trust God? Where do you turn when you don't trust God? Saul, he turned to the medium. Right? We can turn to addictions. We can turn to sin issues, struggles in life. The things created by God, but not God. We can pursue entertainment in any way of trying to escape or trying to numb or just trying to cope with the things going in life, but we don't actually seek God. So when times are difficult, where are you running? And the third one, what will you do to act honorably in tough times? What will you do to act honorably in tough times? It's so easy for us to play the victim. It's so easy for us to go, man, if they just did this, if they didn't do that, and hey, if I had the right stuff and the right knowledge and the right 17 years David had to wait. 17 years of being chased by a person that he admired and honored, who didn't repay it back to him. 17 years he set for us an example of how we can live in hostility honorably. Because I think that that's an example, that's a light that we can shine that the world around us needs to see. That when life stinks, when nothing seems to go our way, we still honor the King. We still honor the King.